Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second student dialogue of Literature Across Borders, a transnational literary exchange program for young people's literature, which myself and Dr. Alexia Casal co founded at Bath Spa University last year. Uh, Dr. Casal is the course leader for the Writing for Young People program at Bath Spa University, and she's also a reader in writing for young people at the university. I've been working in children's publishing in India for more than a decade now, and I'm especially interested in books on environment and history for children. At the heart of literature across borders is the idea of pairing thematically related books to understand how authors across different cultural contexts are writing about similar themes. And I'm very, very delighted to have the second set of students who are going to be discussing Bijal Vachharajani's A Cloud Called Bhura and Julia Green's The Wilderness War. That is our second pairing, which is all about children coping with the changes in their environment and wanting to preserve it. I am going to quickly introduce our chair for this dialogue, Charlotte Taylor. Charlotte is pursuing the MA in Writing for Young People at Bath Spa and comes to the program having taught English literature and language for more than 25 years. She has a passion for reading, loves to write, and is in the process of developing a teen ghost story. So I'm going to hand over the stage to you, Charlotte, so you can proceed with today's dialogue. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Thank you very much, Mega. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's a really lovely to be taking part in this event this afternoon. I'd like to introduce our guests this afternoon. We have Abigail St. John, who is on the Bath Spa MA Writing for Young People, situated at Bath itself. Then we have Friederike Hamann, who is doing the Bath Spa MA virtually from Germany. And then we have Fuzaila Khan, who is doing an MA in English at Ashoka University. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'd like to kick off the discussion by asking you, was this the first time that you read a book by an author in writing for young people from either India or the UK? What were your thoughts about the books when you first got them in terms of your initial perception? And how did you find the reading experience? I'd like to ask that first of all to Abigail.
Yeah, so this was my first time reading a book for young people by an author from India. And it was, sorry, I'm just going over the questions you asked in my mind, trying to make sure I had them all right. The reading experience was pretty incredible. I really loved both of these books, and it was nice to be reading two books on the same topic, so I could sort of see the way that two different cultures approached the same approached climate change. And then, sorry, what was the other question you asked?
Oh, I wondered what your initial perception was, particularly perhaps of A Cloud Called Bhura.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting coming from, I'm not from either of the countries represented in the stories, and so there's always, I think, a bit of a barrier when you first approach a story that is from a culture other than your own, because there's certain things that are taken for granted that you yourself don't know and don't understand. And so I felt that a little bit with both of the stories, like just having to ease my way into a world where there were certain things taken for granted that I hadn't fully understood. But that tension eased pretty quickly, and both of the books just felt sort of joyful and welcoming, I think, in the first few chapters, because in the Wilderness Wars, we immediately go into this, beautiful outside space, and then in A Cloud Called Bhura, I just the moment that it kind of sold me and I was there with the world was when she was talking to her mother at the beginning, and her mother says, oh, I shouldn't say that. And then, so it was just that little moment of comedy was something I could latch on to that pulled me throughout the story.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Friederike, what about you? The same 3 questions.
Yeah, I actually I was really excited to receive the a cloud called Bhura. I thought it looked so stunning, the cover, and I'm always tickled when I just see a publication from another country because there are always these slight differences. And I was, of course, really drawn to the cover, the illustrations, and then I just kind of quickly went through and I saw that there's this structure in there, that there's a really cool illustration of the cloud, and I read the poems and I just thought, wow, this is a really nice way to introduce the baddie of the and just having this personified cloud hover over everything. And then I also love this sketchbook idea because it's this really nice sort of background that's illuminating all the changes that are happening socially and that all the behavior that's changing, and just thought that that was such a brilliant idea, and also gives the book such a nice structure to fall into, to have like this at the beginning of the chapter and then the chapter, and you have the temperature and the data, and I just thought that that's such a clever way to kind of structure the book. And then the reading experience, because I was just kind of looking at that at first, was really fun because I have to say it's such a serious topic, and still there was so much room for playfulness and humor, and I thought that that was very successful, and I loved the characters. And once I got over just seeing, like, just getting to know all the different characters, it was a fantastic read. And there was a lot of chaos still, but still, I think that because there was the structure to fall back onto, I thought it was great. And then the Wilderness War, I think, was same thing. I thought it was a beautiful cover, these different sketches in there, and you could sense right away, okay, there's an adventure in nature. You have all the key elements: the tent, the starry sky, beautiful, and nice map. I always think that's such a good way to find orientation in a story, to have a beautiful map in there. And then just little textures like the notepads that, there's someone taking notes, and there's probably somebody is really looking and observing something, just little details like that. And I agree with Abigail, because I think it was really easy to follow Noah into the scene. It was a very welcoming, beautiful, lyrical first move into the story. So I really enjoyed both books tremendously.
Brilliant, thank you. Fuzaila, how about you? Because you were coming at these books from a different perspective. Tell us about your thoughts.
I think, as for your first question, this was technically not my first time reading a book for young people, because we've all had our fair share of J.K. Rowling and Rustin Bond and everyone. But what was, I think, different about it is, I think I was telling Charlotte and Megha about this earlier, that I did not have like a lot of exposure to environmental literature per se, but or children's literature for that matter. And like my only exposure to it was through eco-critical theory, which again is not the best example. But I think this book kind of really surprised me, because I was reading children's literature after a long time. So what I think really enjoyed was that not only did I get to see a child's perspective, but at so many instances I felt like it was a communication between me and the children in that book, because it's just the way that they were talking about a lot of things. It's like they're telling something to you in your ears. And so I think in one instance Noah goes like, have you noticed the way that parents look at like adults look at each other and they just communicate things without even saying things to each other? I'm like, that's just a very playful way to communicate things. And then in another instance, when they go to the council meeting and he discovers that, oh, a chair is actually a person who's speaking from above there. I mean, the way that he says that, it's just really fun to read. But other than that, I feel like the reading experience was particularly interesting because I got to revisit a lot of very basic ideas that I did not pay much attention to. So, for instance, when they discuss how parks are not an exact alternative for a place like wilderness, that just kind of made me really question, oh yeah, so okay, parks cannot be an alternative, but why? And so like that got me to reading a bit more stuff around it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting point. Thank you. Right. Zooming in, from a huge toxic cloud hovering over the city of Mumbai, contrasted with the threat of a natural wilderness being threatened by developers, these books show how the lives of young people are directly affected by environmental change. How do you think these books convey successfully how significant the environment is in the lives of children across the globe? And I'll ask that question first of all to Abigail.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really thinking about in terms of how this is represented and how we show how it affects children around the world is the way that the difference is shown between the views of the children and the views of the parents. And I was just really interested in both of the stories, how like in a cloud called Bhura, we have the twin doctors, and one is a climate denier and the other one is really trying to push for change, and we see the children's response to that and how they are trying to navigate this issue that will mostly affect them rather than the adults. And then in Wilderness Wars, it was just interesting the way that I tracked the way that people referred to the wilderness. And so we have the group of kids that says the wilderness, and then the sign calls it derelict land, and the dad calls it the wasteland, and the two older teens call it the dump. And so just the shifting of language where the children see the environment and see that their little patch of land, but also just natural land in general, as something that is to be treasured and to be protected, whereas the adults aren't quite keyed in that same way and aren't able to appreciate it in the same way. And then same in a cloud called Bhura, where the kids are the ones who are really trying to push for a difference. And I don't know, I'm not sure if I've 100% answered the question, but that's just something that really stuck out to me in this. And it was this sort of realization that climate change is something that mostly affects young people and will have the strongest effects on young people. And so the way that they have to engage with it is wildly different than the way that adults have to engage with it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. And I really like the way you've teased out those different perspectives. Really interesting. Friederike, how do you answer that question?
Yeah, I think the situation in a cloud called Bhura is just incredibly dire, and you can feel the consequences that it has on life in a big city. It's just there's nowhere to go really at first. And it also the book really shows how dependent people are on the environment actually functions, so that we are dependent on air, water, on temperature. All that just makes it really you can sense this oppression when that doesn't work, what it does to people. And the different scenes, the respiratory problems that people have, the health problems, and also the deaths during the flood. I mean, there's a lot of really catastrophic things happening in that book that are really awful and terrible. And I think it's shown really, really well. It's also, to me, the most oppressing thing was that actually the circumstances just kept deteriorating more and more, and there was really no improvement. And I kind of have to hand it to the book too, that there was no happy ending, in that sense that it cannot be resolved, because it's been it took so much time to get there, that there is no easy solution. And that's another I think the book conveyed that really well, that there is necessarily no happy ending. It also showed that there's maybe not good crisis management, not good communication during a catastrophe like that, and that there are always people who are more prone to suffer in a situation like that, like children who are more vulnerable and more exposed to a situation like that. The Wilderness War, I think, because there is not such a catastrophic event at hand, it's a little bit different, but it definitely shows how the urban environment is just completely compromised, and there are no more, or fewer and fewer spaces for kids to actually explore nature and experience nature. And so I think the book really shows that well, and I think we can relate to why this is so important, that this space is being treasured and protected, that like the last bit of it. So yeah, and also shows the few rights that children have, and how they are so dependent on adults to help them along and support them.
Yeah, fantastic answer. I think what you say about A Cloud Called Bhura is particularly pertinent, because I think the book was published in 2014, and here we are 10 years later. And it's even more acute. So great answers. Thank you. Fuzaila, what about you? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I think that the way this book maintained its beginning by showing the readers how the children's everyday lives are so intimately intertwined with the wilderness, I think that also really helps in conveying their attachment to the place. But I think what really helped me personally was that in the first few chapters they're just building up, how every day after school they have to go there, and like they're already planning what they'll do in their vacations. And the map in the beginning was just so helpful, and it just kind of really helps you visualize, right? And I think what other than this, the way that these children were describing the animals and the birds and the insects living in the wilderness also kind of showed that they're not just concerned about, oh well, we lose a place to play, but no, they're actually concerned about the living beings who actually occupy that area. So I think that was something which kind of conveyed their attachment. But I think in the narrative style, the way that I'm being led into an entire narrative through children, and especially Noah, I think that also helped a lot. And like they're just making it pretty it kind of, by showing those children's life, they're kind of telling us that these children do not have jobs to go to, they don't have money to earn, they just have a school, and after that they really look forward to the wilderness. So just the thought of losing, a place like that, it, the way that it's painted so truthfully is fascinating. And especially Noah's discomfort about the entire fight, and the way that adults are getting involved in it, and how he feels isolated. I think that very well brings out how things which might matter a little to us can be like a really big deal to someone like Noah.
Yeah, the children's world is just encapsulated in that beautiful wild space, isn't it? Thank you. Now on to the adults. Okay, what is your opinion of the way that the adults are represented in these books? In what ways are the adults both instrumental to change or helpless in the face of the challenges presented? And so I'm going to ask Abigail that question. What do you make of the adults?
I mean, I touched on this a little bit, but it's interesting the way that they aren't engaged with the issues the same way that the children are. And there's an interesting thing that happens in both, where it is the very young people and the very old people that are the most in tune with the issue of the story, because we have Nanu and Ben in Cloud Called Bhura, and then we have what's his name, Mr. Moss in the Wilderness Wars, that are sort of the closest allies to the children, where the parents can't quite understand. And I think it was something that was really interesting to me about the parents and the way the parents were portrayed is looking at Omni's mother and father, and how their sort of first response is to just leave And whereas Omni's sort of first instinct is to stay and try to fix things. And it's interesting because it's hard not to look at the way that the adults are portrayed in these stories and feel rather pessimistic, because it does kind of show, where we are at currently, where like they were talking about in a cloud called Bhura, a lot of these protests and a lot of the legal actions are coming from children, and not from adults, because adults have sort of dropped the ball there and have, failed in that way. But there is also so much hope, and the fact that they do have allies, and they do have in Wilderness Wars, Holly and Toby's dad, who goes to the council and helps figure out how to save the wilderness, and just all of these little moments where there is it's a sort of negative portrayal almost, but also with just enough hope to keep it keep you moving forward, I guess.
Yeah. Which I guess is the success of the book, to offer some kind of hope in the face of all those challenges. Yeah. Thank you. Friederike.
Yeah, I think that just from a perspective of a child, I think that the adults are portrayed quite realistically. I think most of the dreams and needs and goals that kids have just don't align with the adults, I think, most of the time. So I think they it's just like their instinct just tells them to hide their goals and their projects from them. So I think that's why in both books, I think it's so interesting that they are hiding all of this, and some of the characters are more suspicious of the adults than others. Like Noah, I think, is just particularly suspicious of all the other adult world and does not want to seek out help. And so I just think that's a very, to me, that's a very realistic portrayal of what the situation is like. So then over time, this distance is overcome, and I think they're getting they're getting a lot of support, and they're getting a lot of help from grown-ups and the adults. And then they have special agents. That's what Abigail said, like Mr. Moss or Dr. Vidisha. I hope I said that right. Who actually is a lot more on their eye level, like who is open with them, who confronts them with knowledge and information, and who actually talks to them on a different level. And there's more trust there. And so, I think there's definitely at first like there's a difference between the adult world and the kids' world.
Yeah, very, very much so. Thank you. Fuzaila.
Yeah. So this could be a side effect of being raised in a brown household, but I actually really thought initially that the adults are going to be portrayed in a very negative light. Like they're going to stop the children from, acting out and stuff like that. But because I was like kind of waiting that, Noah's mom is like really going to be like, oh, you better stop this. But I think what I really liked about the adults is not just the way that they're being talked about, but the fact that it's so clearly pictured for us that these are not just adults, but they're adults who have had a childhood. So every time they're kind of, trying to advise the kids, it's kind of reflected that they are reminiscent of their own childhood as well. So they understand in that sense what the children are going through, and they're not dismissive, that's why. So like, I mean, Mr. Moss's character is of course pretty much out there. It's pretty encouraging of Noah's love for the wilderness, but it's also the parents who are trying to kind of support their children, but also realizing and acknowledging the fact that theirs is a very secondary role, instead of kind of trying to insert themselves in the narrative. Yeah, so I think that's what I really liked about them.
Yeah, a really interesting portrayal. Now, my next question, I think, will be really interesting, because we're talking to Abigail, who hails from the States. Friederike is in Germany, and Fuzaila is in India. So my next question is, do you think that young readers in your part of the world would be able to relate to these stories? how do you think some of the interactive elements of the book help to engage the reader? So those are two very different questions. So let's start perhaps with the first one with each of you. So Abigail, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think that young readers from the States would absolutely be able to relate to these stories. And I think I think the way that the reason they are so relatable is because they're told with such humor and such heart, you know. So there's they're telling stories that are very specific to a certain location, but within that there is just there's like the way they approach that is to lead with the relationships between the characters, and so lead with, you know, the friendships between the two groups, and the connections that they build, and then also with just little moments of comedy that could draw anyone in. And so yeah, I think absolutely they would be able to relate to it.
Yeah. And what do you think, just sticking with you, Abigail, what do you think about the interactive nature of the books? Because both books have got all these lovely little kind of maps or suggestions about leaves or little kind of drawings and the poems. Why do you think those are going to draw young readers in both cases?
I mean, I feel like that's always there's something that kids always respond to, is, you know, something that they can, something that makes it concrete and that takes it from just the world of words into you know, a visual or something that they can really relate to and grasp onto. And like, especially with a cloud called Bhura, all of the little like notebook pages and everything, like they were, for me, like they sort of acted as a reset, you know, as like, because I have a short attention span personally, and whenever I felt my mind start to wander, you know, one of those pages would come in and I'd be very focused again, because it was just something new to sort of jog my attention and get me back into the story. And yeah, I think it's just that they sort of act as sort of, I don't know, anchors, or like, I almost think of them as like little islands. So like if we imagine the book as a whole ocean, and then all of the little illustrations and everything are islands that the kids can sort of stop at and rest for a little while before they continue on with the story.
That's a really lovely way to look at it. Friederike, what about you? Can I start with the first question about, you know, young readers in Germany?
Sure. I think, I mean, I would agree with Abigail. I mean, I think first and foremost, they're actually both adventure stories. And I think kids can relate to that. It's teamwork. It's the way they're actually shaping their own adventure and how they're trying to find solutions. I think that's so brilliant. I think every kid can relate to it. Here, if I think of kids in Berlin, I think the Wilderness War is particularly, in a way, particularly relevant, because Berlin used to be so wild. It's after the fall of the wall, just there were so many spaces that were completely unkempt and really just wild, and you could explore them. And those spaces are disappearing now. And I think to any kid living in the city, you are actually yearning for green space. You're yearning for something to explore, a little bit of wilderness, a little bit of something that, and nowadays there's also safety concerns. So I think kids' rights in the city they're just becoming more and more difficult. There's of course always parks, but just like these wild areas, really wild places, that's just rare. So I'd say that's particularly for Berlin, that could be an amazing story. I think kids could really relate to it. And a cloud called Bhura, same thing. I think we all can relate to what it means when, you know, air is polluted, when you cannot breathe, when you actually are in danger because of it. So I think both stories are highly relatable, of course. The interactive elements, I think, are both really fantastic. I mean, they're on one hand in a cloud called Bhura. I think they're actually they're widening the scope, which I really like. You're kind of in this bubble the whole time, but then all of a sudden you see, oh, there's actually fashion evolving from this whole theme, and there's all this other stuff stuff happening outside of the bubble, which I think is really a nice way to get a larger sense of the social context as to what is happening. And then towards the end, it just becomes really more like almost like a reference guide. How can you become socially active? How can you become an activist? And that's very inspiring, I think, to young people. So it actually can extend the power of the story to a real cause for activism, which is great. Same thing for the Wilderness War. Also, the fact that you're at the end, you actually see, oh, I'm not alone. There's actually organizations out there. I can connect. I can actually start by contributing something right now, right here and there, and that's powerful, I think. And then having very playful little exercises that also refer to what happened in the book, I think it's brilliant, really cool.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I really like the point you made about Berlin and the sort of, after the fall of the wall, the interesting way that places were, there to be explored. Really interesting. Fuzaila, tell us about your interpretation.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if the young readers living in urbanized areas like Delhi would be, able to relate so much to this, because they have multiple classes to go to, and then great, you have a park, have fun. But I definitely think that kids living in provincial areas and smaller towns would relate to this, because a large chunk of their everyday lives, including mine when I was a kid, it really revolves around going to places like the wilderness with their friends and forming so many of their friendships in areas like those. And I think what also make, like, the elements that make the story relatable are, of course, again, the map and the games and everything. That really helps, because when I was reading also, and every single child is kind of describing the way they're trying to make their den. It's like, if I was there, I would do this to my den, definitely. So that was really fun. And secondly, I think one element, like, it's a narrative choice, but I think I would like to treat it as an element. I think including and introducing characters like that of Molly was a great choice, because it's not like she was already present. The story started without her, right? But I mean, those people who already have friends like these or places like these to go to, for them it's not that difficult to try to engage with this book. But with a character like Molly, you could, she enters and then she slowly develops a friendship, and then she also starts participating in this entire war. So when you see a third character, a sort of an outsider trying to be a part of something and really being made to feel like they're a part of something, by extension the reader also starts feeling the same. So I think that really helps the engagement part. um, Other than that, I think the imaginative aspect of the book was very engaging, because it's not just that it's so descriptive so it helps, but also every time something happens, the children go like, imagine if this happens, or imagine if that happens. So they themselves are very actively trying to paint a picture for you, and it kind of ends up being a conversation between my thought and their thought. So I think that's very interesting.
Yeah. That's a really great answer. Thank you. And I think, that character who comes in later on, and you think she's going to be the antagonist, but actually she's drawn along. It's a really good point. Thank you. Do you think that these stories subscribe to commonly held notions on environmental literature, and how do they contribute to young people understanding the concept of the Anthropocene? Abby.
Well, I'll be honest, I haven't read a lot of environmental literature. I think my first real foray into environmental literature for young people was on the course at Vachharajani Uni, where we read The Last Bear, which is an environmental piece, and started looking into it a little bit from there. And I do think, from what I've read, which is limited, these do seem to subscribe to. It feels like a lot of environmental literature is sort of, this is going to sound strange, but hopeless, but with hope. Because it's presenting a world where we are sort of past the point of no return, and it presents that pretty clearly. But it also tries to find some way forward and something to, some type of hope to hold on to. And these very much seems to fall into that. Like in Wilderness Wars, yes, these green spaces are becoming smaller and they are disappearing, but they've held on to this one. And then in A Cloud Called Bhura, yes, the cloud is still there, and it's, they may not win. They may not succeed in turning it back, but they've taken the first step, and they've taken it together. And so I do think in that way it does sort of fit in with other stories in that genre. And then as far as the Anthropocene goes, I liked the way that A Cloud Called Bhura presented that term, because it was it didn't like sort of fully lay it out for you, but it gave you the words you needed to look up so that you could go on a journey of discovery on your own, which I thought was a good way to do it, because a lot of these stories, if you spend a lot of time sitting a kid down and telling them these are all of the things you need to know, they're going to lose interest. But if they come to it on their own, then they'll be able to dig into it more deeply. And so it sort of gently introduced these terms, and just enough to allow a kid to go off and explore them.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. Friederike.
I think they definitely both. It's a little bit of a different situation, maybe, because A Cloud Called Bhura is in the city, so it's just a completely different setting. I think the Wilderness War has the this sort of kind of intact, almost intact wild place, where the kids are actually where they can explore, and where they actually can cherish nature too. And through Noah, I think there's this notion that nature is a source of inspiration. It's also solace. So all that is not really happening in A Cloud Called Bhura. The kids are stuck in the city, and they sometimes are reminded maybe of experiences at a very polluted beach. So they don't actually have that same kind of experience that the kids in the Wilderness War have. They are already deprived from that because it's no longer happening. So I think that both of the stories are touching on very different aspects on literature, on the environment. I think that's why maybe the Anthropocene is just so much more important, and the idea of the Anthropocene is so much more important in A Cloud Called Bhura, and that's why it's very explicitly also taken to the front. And I really like how it's explained, but then also how you can I love that speech, and I actually have it as one of my favorite parts in the book, that actually Dr. Bishida, when she stages as Dr. Bishida, and there's just so much hubris in there, that actually what the Anthropocene does to humans, how they are becoming really arrogant towards nature, and how they're actually also twisting the arguments, and how they're trying to portray environmental disasters and trying to make it work to their advantage, and spin the stories. So I think so. It's just a lot more. I think the idea of the Anthropocene is just a lot more in the forefront in A Cloud Called Bhura. However, I think it's also visible in the Wilderness War, where, for example, Noah is trying to build the pond and he's trying to reestablish a biosphere, something to attract the newts. I think it's such a sweet scene where he's actually trying to create something within days that would usually take forever, and it just kind of shows really well what culture, like human civilization, does to our environment and how difficult it is to recreate. I think that kind of illustrates it really nicely for children. So I really like that.
Yeah, I know, I'd agree. I thought the thing that was quite interesting is I think that Julia Green lived in Bath for a long time, and I couldn't sort of quite place where the Wilderness War, what city it was. I didn't feel it was Bath somehow. I thought it could be London or Manchester. Wasn't quite sure. I'd love to know. Maybe find out. Fuzaila, what was your take on this idea about environmental literature and the Anthropocene?
Yeah, for me, because I picked up a book like this after a very long time, I think the book very much made accessible almost every element, or at least tried to make it accessible, every element of environmental literature. Because it's, focusing on the human nature relationship. It's also focusing on, the impact of industrialization or other sort of advancements. And it's also focusing on ecological restoration. So I think in that sense, it covers a lot many grounds, and especially considering the fact that it's written for a very young audience. I think the way that it decided to talk about all of these things around the lives of inhabitants, neighbor, like making it a very neighborhood kind of an area, like something you would want to know, like where is it, right? And I think by narrativizing it like that, you're kind of telling people that you are a stakeholder here, and you're very much responsible in shaping this planet. And whether you do it for your own needs, or choose to strike a balance between your needs and that of the natures, that's completely on you. And I feel like stories like these, they really help in cultivating, or at least encouraging, a mindset which allows for the latter. So I think in that sense it um, clarified a lot of things.
Yeah, I think the idea of the future being in the hands of the young people who are reading the books, very much so. Thank you. Right. So, next question. Are there books on the environment from your countries that you would like to recommend to each other, and to just generally to readers in India or the UK? Please, tell us your ideas and why you would recommend these titles to young readers. So, Abigail, we might need to ask in a moment. So, if I ask Friederike first.
Yep. So it's actually a really interesting just an interesting situation. The German publishing market has a lot of information in terms of well, it's basically it's information books that they actually have for kids, but not that many novels. It was really interesting to discover that. I wasn't aware of that, probably because most of the books that I read were English, from the English-speaking, either American or British, and there are actually a lot of them, but there's a lot of books in Germany that are giving tremendous amount of information, data, graphics, good illustrations, but just not a lot of novels. So I actually, I found this one here, which I would like to recommend. It's a little bit for older readers, and it's not a German author, but he's Scandinavian. And in the 80s, I'm not sure if you are familiar with his first book. It's called Sophie's World. Yeah. Okay. So basically, and I really like that idea, is that just to ask questions and somehow approach a topic by asking questions. And this is called Nora's World, and she's kind of dreaming, having dreams of like this apocalyptic scenario in 2048. And then she's actually asking herself how she can, what she can do to avoid the scenario. I have to say, I haven't read it. I have just discovered it, but I just thought that the idea was really intriguing. And so I definitely think, because I liked his first book, I think it's worth a read. And it just got shortlisted too for the German publishing, like the Kids Literature Prize. So that was my first suggestion. And then this one here is called How Much Warmer is 1 Degree? That's just a lot of information on, just starting with how actually climate is being, how we can actually collect data, why we are actually, why we know so much about the climate. So going back to, I don't know, all the different ways in how we can record weather, and then how the weather patterns are changing and what it does to the environment, and what it would mean to urban life, to rural life, what it would mean to individuals and animals and life on this planet. But also what I think is really important then, are there any solutions? And there's also a lot of suggestions what we can do to prevent this from happening. And then Charlotte actually asked me to also introduce one book was translated, and because there are just not many books that are translated from German into English, but this one I think you might have maybe heard of. It's actually a very popular book in Germany, and it's been translated into English. It's called, in English, it's like, can you hear how trees talk? And I think it's fantastic because, one of the solutions that we have to dealing with the climate change is obviously to plant as many trees as we can, and it's sort of like a huge tool and a huge solution to a problem. So really introducing what trees are about, how they communicate, what they do, and how amazing they are, I think it's just as important as to show what catastrophes can arise. I think I really would like to recommend this book to everyone.
Wow. You've got 3 fantastic suggestions there. It would be really useful if we can kind of, I don't know, when Meg puts the social media posts together, to have those kind of listings. I think that'd be really good. I'll go next to Fuzaila, and then I'll come back to Abigail. So Abigail, would you like to give us your recommendations?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I got kicked out of the Wi-Fi for a moment. Like I said, books, environmental stories, isn't really my area of expertise, but one that really came to mind is there's a beautiful picture book called "We Are the Water Protectors," or "We Are Water Protectors," by, let's see, what is her name? It is Carol Lindstrom, and it was the 2021 Caldecott winner, and it's a book about movements in climate change activism movements, particularly led by Indigenous people in the United States, and it's a really gorgeous book that I would definitely recommend.
Sounds great. Sounds really good. Fuzaila, what about your choices?
So there's this one book that I read during my undergrad. It's Indra Sinha's Animals People, and it's written about this Bhopal gas tragedy which happened in 1984 in India, where a plant led to an industrial plant led to a gas leak, and it kind of, got into the entire city, and it led like very devastating effects, and the effects are still there. So like it really ruined people's lives. And so it kind of discusses that devastating impact, not just on the people but also the ecology, from the perspective of this protagonist, whose name is Animal, because he has to walk on all fours because his spine has been twisted after the tragedy. And
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty painful story, but it's also like you need to build a tolerance for a very rash kind of a language, because he has lost any respect, like all respect for the things around him after what has happened. But I think it's a very necessary read. Mm. And other than that, there is Everything the Light Touches by Janice Parriott. She's one of the Ashoka faculty, and so I recently came across this book, and it's a very interesting read. It focuses on the lives of four peoples, and they're on like some journey. Their routes do not cross each other's, but like somehow their stories are still kind of connected to each other's, and it kind of traces how it traces a person's journey from, just having a mere curiosity for the world around them to acknowledging the modern disregard that we have now. And it covers a lot of topics like, indigenous struggle for land rights and things like those. And it's just I think, and like each story, it's divided into four parts, because of four travelers, and each story is written from a very different narratorial voice and narrative style. And it just, in very different ways, it's interesting how it just keeps reminding us of our own role in exploiting the natural world. In general, the way that it's written, it kind of really, brings you in, holds you by its collar, but softly, and be like, oh well, see, this is what you've done. So I think that would be like my number one recommendation.
Brilliant. Some really, really good recommendations here, and it would be great to get a list of those. Thank you. Now, we're going to come to the part of the session where we are going to hear from each of you your favourite sections from the books that you've read. And I think that it would be great, because we've got the time, if we could hear perhaps something from each of the books, if you would like to, or if you have two different things that you would like to read to us. I think we have time to hear that. So I wondered whether we might this time work backwards, and we might start with Fuzaila. Is that okay? I know that your screen will magnify in a moment. So if we ask Fuzaila to read your favourite sections from the two books, A Cloud Called Bhura and A Wilderness War.
I do not have to read them in a linear way, right? So I think there's this one, 214. Yes. Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier as well, that I was really interested in the way that Noah was feeling anxious, and the way that, the metaphor of the deer and the crow, like I still have questions regarding it. I don't think it's completely resolved in my head, but I really, like, it got me into thinking. It got my reading at a slower pace. Quotes like these, Noah still had that trapped feeling in his chest that he got sometimes at school. It made him want to run and climb or fly if only he could. How wonderful to be able to flap your wings and take off like the crow. So I think this is just one of the instances where I just, where I enjoyed the fact that my reading has been slowed down. And then there's 169. Yeah. So they're having a discussion about, why are we doing this and things like those. And this conversation goes like, everything hangs on what happens tomorrow, Zeke said. It's up to us, Noah said. We have to fight for the wilderness, for all the plants and creatures and trees. They can't fight for themselves. Exactly, Holly said. No one said anything for a long time. They were all thinking about Noah's words. They sat close together and watched the fire. This is again another moment where I felt like my reading slowed down, because I also want to sit with them for a longer time and think about why we need to speak for those who can't fight for themselves. Um, Other than that, this is like a pretty simple code, but again, I enjoyed the fact that it has been introduced in a children's book. Um, 63. This is very much good. Yeah.
Do you have another section from Wilderness War you want to read to us?
Yeah, this is just the last one.
Okay, great, thank you.
So Toby is suggesting that this is a war and you need to take it seriously and we need to make weapons and stuff like those. And then one of the kids goes like, "Words can fight too," Asha said. "The pen is mightier than the sword." Zeke laughed. "Shut up," Holly said. "Asha has a point. We have to show people how much we love the wilderness, what it means, why it needs protecting." And I think what I really like the code, why I really like the code is because it's already there in their heads. Like they already know what's the right way of doing things. Like they can take up a pen and write things down. So I think that's why I also really like this quote particularly.
Friederike, can I ask you to give us some readings?
Sure, yeah. Maybe I'll start with the cloud called Bhura. I actually picked the speech that Dr. Vidisha, but staging as Dr. Vidisha, her twin, actually did for the introduction of the Suck Up 9, the machine that tries to suck up all the cloud from the atmosphere. I just really like the scene because it just shows the like her hubris on one side, on one hand, just how she's just so arrogant towards the whole theme, and how she's just trying to completely ignore the fact that there's this incredible catastrophe happening. We live in exciting times where technology is transforming lives before our very eyes. Scientists like me agree that our current technology will avoid climate change, and Suck Up 9 is a fine example of that. We do not have to worry about climate change. It is but a natural phenomenon, just like this cloud. Already methods such as geoengineering, cloud seeding, ground fixing, carbon sequestering in the ocean are being evolved as a way of combating this natural phenomenon. We cannot even begin to think that human beings could cause such extreme planetary changes. That, she chuckled, would be akin to God. And we are, after all, only humans. Let's not be that conceited. So I really like that, how she just twists everything around. I think that was just a very successful way to portray kind of like this human way to ignore our own conundrum. From the Wilderness War, I picked the scene where Noah is trying to actually reintroduce the newts to the wilderness, so that the wilderness has a better chance to be protected, and it just shows just how much of an effort it is to make right what has already become destroyed. So I really like that scene a lot. Noah fetched the spade from the greenhouse. It was too hot in there. He propped the door open to let in some air. He took the spade with him down to the boggy patch near the bamboo at the bottom corner of the wilderness. It made sense to dig the pond here where the ground was already waterlogged. There must be an underground spring or stream or something, and if he dug a hole deep enough and lined its stones, maybe it would be good enough for newts and frogs. Dragonflies might come too. That's what it had said on the computer. Like magic, they arrive as if from thin air. Crow watched from the top of the pear tree. Noah dug deep into the squishy ground. Water puddled up as he dug, filling the hole and swirling round in a muddy pool. It was very satisfying. He hunted for small flat rocks and stones to go on the bottom, and then he had a better idea and searched through the dump for something that might work as a pond lining. Finally, under a smelly, stinky pile of wet leaves and grass clippings, he found a blue plastic sack. He cut it to the right size with a kitchen knife he'd left in the bramble den, big enough to cover the bottom and up the sides of the hole, and he weighted it back down with the flat pebbles. The water was muddy, but it would clear once the soil had settled down to the bottom. Perfect. Now he needed some plants to go around the edges, and pondweed and water snails to keep the water clean. But from where? And there's this little paragraph relating to it, a few pages. So, Anil said, how do we get newts to turn up now? Can we buy some? You have to wait, Noah said. They find the pond, eventually, like the butterfly and dragonflies and the frogs and toads and other wild creatures. You have to be patient. Only we can't, Anil said. Realistically, Noah, we don't have time for that.
Thank you. Really nicely chosen. And Abigail, would you like to read your sections?
Absolutely, yeah. I picked two sections that are sort of similar and serve a similar purpose in the narrative, I thought. So in The Wilderness War, I was looking at chapter 12 in my ebook copy. It's page 127, but I'm not sure how that translates to the physical copy. But it's the conversation that Asha and Noah were having about, trying to prove that the wilderness is important. And just something Asha said really stuck with me. Maybe it's like Holly said, everything matters on the wilderness, not because it's rare, but simply because it's here, living its life alongside all the other creatures. Why should one kind of bee or beetle matter more than another? And then in A Cloud Called Bhura, I was looking at, in the chapter At a Premium, something Tammy says. She says, "Are you kidding me? We have to do something because no one else is doing anything. And I don't want to grow up in a world where Bhura wins. I can't see a thing beyond my hands. The haze is so thick. It's like being in a constant dust storm. People are leaving the city. Purna's family has already left, and Amni's parents are threatening to take her away. Nanu has been so sick he's got a nebulizer glued to him all the time. We almost lost her home." She broke off, wheezing for air, and then continued. "We are all seeing water and power cuts. The farmers are protesting about their crops dying. Everyone's falling sick. The flamingos are gone. That's why we have to do something."
Very, very powerful choices. Well, I think we've probably come to the end of our discussion. There's been some amazing kind of responses, and it's just so fantastic to hear all your insights, having sort of read both of these books, and to sort of see how, different elements of different books kind of pull out and you see different significance. But I think the overwhelming impression I get is that these are really, really important books. And we need to keep putting these books into the hands of young people and making sure that we're reading them and writing them too, perhaps. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think that was a very enlightening, interesting dialogue.